From his stronghold in the wild Sierra Maestre Mountains, Cuba's Fidel Castro emerged triumphant after 2 years of guerrilla warfare against the Batista regime. The revolution that began with Castro a fugitive, practically alone, landing with 82 followers, to be nearly wiped out by government forces, ended with the flight of dictator Fulgencio Batista and the entry into Havana of rebel forces to be acclaimed by the city.
I was just 8 years old, but clearly remember when Fidel Castro and his revolutionary forces took military control of the Republic of Cuba, defeating the Batista military dictatorship. Upon taking power, Castro created a socialist state under Communist Party rule, the first of these in the Western Hemisphere. Just 3 years later, tensions between Cuba, Russia, and the United States created one of the most dangerous moments in all of human history. As we approach the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I want to share some historic reminders about momentous events of those terrifying times and provide perspective on diplomatic progress that I was fortunate to participate in more recently. As Treasurer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, I joined a 2014 delegation to Cuba at the invitation of the Cuban Academy of Science. More than 50 years after the severing of U.S.-Cuban diplomatic relations, our mission was undertaken in the spirit of mutual respect to explore opportunities for scientific collaboration in biomedical research, environmental science, and other fields. We benefited from outstanding expertise in our group, including Nobel laureate Peter Agre, who had previous experience in Cuba. Our mission included visits to the Cuban Academy of Science, where we were reminded of important Cuban contributions to science, including Carlos Finlay, who was nominated 7 times for a Nobel Prize based on his pioneering research into yellow fever. We reviewed Cuban scientific research in medical technology, neuroscience, infectious diseases, and various biopharmaceutical development programs. Among the many highlights of our mission was the opportunity to meet with senior government leaders in marine protection. We were briefed about Cuba's stewardship programs in significant ocean ecosystems, such as the renowned Gardens of the Queen in Cuba's southern territorial waters. This led to plans for various collaborations in marine sanctuaries, and we explored mutual interest in protection of the Sargasso Sea in the North Atlantic, where I had recently led a pioneering high seas ocean stewardship initiative. Our 2014 science diplomacy mission culminated with the signing of an agreement for further cooperation, with the hope that our scientific interactions would contribute to a new era of diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States. While in Havana, we were invited to visit a monument to an important historic event in Cuban-American relations, the sinking of the U.S. battleship Maine in 1898. Amidst Cuba's War of Independence from Spain in the late 19th century, war erupted between the United States and Spain shortly after the battleship Maine exploded and sank in Havana Harbor, killing 260 crew members. As Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Teddy Roosevelt played a key role in the Spanish-American War that followed, resulting in victory for the United States and independence for Cuba.
And cannon, yes, intellect, yeah, similar before, okay?
Pero más pequeño.
Sí.
Okay, yeah.
Another fascinating site visit was to bunkers and gun emplacements associated with the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. 60 years ago, in October 1962, the United States and Soviet Union engaged in a very tense and extraordinarily dangerous political and military standoff when it was discovered that nuclear-armed missiles had been installed in Cuba just 90 miles from U.S. shores.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back.
A story that became known long after the crisis concluded illustrates the magnitude of the danger we faced in those times. The story focuses on a key and often overlooked figure named Vasily Arkhipov, who served as deputy commander of Russian submarine K-19, which was carrying nuclear warheads in Cuban waters. Arkhipov was second in command in a nuclear-armed Foxtrot-class submarine, part of a flotilla of 4 submarines protecting Soviet ships on their way to Cuba. On October 27, as the submarines approached the U.S.-imposed quarantine line, U.S. Navy ships started dropping signaling depth charges to force the K-19 sub to surface for identification, unaware that it was carrying nuclear weapons. Depth charge explosions rocked the submarine, which went dark except for emergency lights. With batteries running low, the submarine interior experienced extreme heat and carbon dioxide. Unable to contact Moscow, Captain Savitsky assumed that war had broken out between the two countries, and he recommended the launch of a nuclear torpedo. Military protocol fortunately required that the 3 officers on board the submarine had to agree unanimously to launch the nuclear torpedo by activating 3 separate launch keys. When a second officer sided with Captain Savitsky, only Arkhipov stood in the way of launching World War III, reportedly by swallowing his launch key so it could not be used by others. Miraculously, the nuclear missile was never launched, and via diplomatic discussions the world will never forget, Kennedy and Khrushchev avoided war and the prospect of nuclear annihilation. On return to Russia, submarine crew members were often faced with disgrace by superiors, but Archipov's heroic actions were eventually recognized by the world community. After that sobering visit, and beyond our important work, our hosts were eager to have us experience celebrated elements of Cuban culture.
Our cooperation with Latin America, with Cuba, is very important to me. As an American and as a Puerto Rican, as a woman scientist is very important. I am very honored that the AAAS invited me to come with them here.
Signs of important figures in Cuban history were highly visible on our trip, including Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and a key Cuban ally, President Chavez of Venezuela. Upon return to the United States, we published our findings, and we found great interest among public officials. Just a year later, we were invited as special guests to the reopening of the Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C., following President Obama's reestablishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. It was very gratifying to be part of an initiative that elevated the role of science and foreign policy to address global challenges in support of a healthy, prosperous, just, and safe world. Yet at the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, more than 12,000 nuclear weapons remain an ominous threat to our world amid rising global tensions and armed conflicts. As a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, I share our August 2022 news report that the future of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament is in danger. Leadership in global activism is urgently needed to achieve the United Nations goal of complete elimination of nuclear weapons to secure our common future.